Hello, and welcome back to the Long Distance Love Bombs podcast. I am your host, Dr. Jeremy Goldberg, and our guest today is one that I am so excited about, which is Ky Dickens. Ky is the host of a new podcast series called the Telepathy Tapes, which I am a huge fan of. It is the most mind-bending, soul-awakening, paradigm-shifting thing that I have heard in years. I have sent it to nearly all of my friends and family and said, hey, you have to listen to this. This is crazy. And the most common response that I get from those individuals is something to the effect of, dude, what the hell? I'm in. I'm all in. I cannot wait for the next episode to drop. And basically, the gist of the telepathy tapes is that non-speaking children on the autism spectrum are able to read the minds of people, most particularly their moms. And on the website, it describes this show as a groundbreaking series that challenges everything we think we know about communication and the human mind. And Ky travels around with a neuroscientist named Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, and they test this in various ways, and they basically invite you to contemplate the world through the eyes of individuals who speak without words, and it is challenging, it is captivating, it's insane. I don't know what to do with this information. It is something where I'll listen to an episode and I'll think, damn, what did I just listen to? We're talking about collective consciousness, the idea that creativity is eternal. We're talking about individuals who are able to communicate telepathically with hundreds of other people around the world. We're talking about mind reading. We're talking about God and heaven and the nature of time and reincarnation and how to deal with the fear of death, etc. Big questions, big topics. And it essentially puts a target on the materialistic worldview, the scientific paradigm whereby things need to be seen and measured and understood. And it presents this alternative, wonderful idea that, hey, there's a lot of weird stuff going on out there, and there's enough of it now that we should pay a little bit closer attention to this. And Ky, who is an award-winning filmmaker, documentarian, writer, does a really eloquent and wonderful job of embedding skepticism and caution and a little bit of humanity, a lot of humanity, but a little bit of humility into this whole thing. I cannot encourage you more to listen to the telepathy tapes. And in this conversation with Ky, we basically just drop in and she describes what she uncovered, and we explore a few big ideas. And I just reached out to Ky and said, hey, can I talk to you? Because I don't know what to do with this content that you are putting out. How do you make sense of it? What did this do to you and your worldview? How do you make sense of the idea or the possibility that children can read people's brains and thoughts and they can see through people's eyes? What? Anyway, I'm rambling now, but this conversation with Ky Dickens is fantastic. And again, go and check out the telepathy tapes and let me know what you think. Everybody I've sent it to has said, man, this is good. I've not had a single person tell me, hey, I didn't like that, or that was a waste of my time. Anyway, enjoy this chat with Ky Dickens. Okay. Ky Dickens, welcome to the podcast. Officially.
Thank you.
I am so excited for this conversation. We're going to dive into your work and your passion project called Telepathy Tapes. But as a starting point, I like to just ask this very simple yet potentially profound question, which is like, for those people listening that have never heard of a Ky Dickens before, who are you? Like, what's your deal?
Yeah, I'm a documentary filmmaker by trade. I've made 5 feature films, usually in the social issue space. And I think the reason we're on right now is because I made a quick side track into podcasting as a means to get a story that I was working on as a documentary out to the public, unfiltered, the most pure, the most untouched way possible, because I realized that this was such I think I'm speaking for a lot of people when I say it's a pretty profound, important story that could really call into to question the origins of our consciousness and what we're capable of human beings. And I felt it could be a bad decision to have a huge network executive telling me I had to take this off or that out or this out or that out. So leading with a podcast to try to keep the message nice and direct and pure was what I did. And it has been such an unbelievable journey for the past 6 months.
Yeah, I love that. And so you went out to make a film and you realized, oh, this is fundamentally questioning how I perceive consciousness, the universe, and communication. I should probably do another project to get this out into the world.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little, okay, so the podcast is called the Telepathy Tapes. And what started out 3 years ago was me exploring a documentary featuring the work of Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, who was a neuroscientist, Johns Hopkins trained, Harvard professor, who started to test children with severe autism that were non-speakers, meaning they couldn't, communicate with their voice. They usually communicate via pointing to a letterboard. She was finding widespread claims of mind reading and telepathy that was extremely accurate within this group of people. And so I met her and wanted to figure out if this was really happening. And, I'm a nonfiction storyteller. Like I am come at everything open-minded, but definitely skeptical and want to use journalistic integrity, right? Everything you do, your reputation, your career kind of hinges on it. So I treaded really lightly. And what happened to me was just really, truly falling down a rabbit hole, just into, wait, okay, when I first met Dr. Powell and I had her read parents' emails that were coming in, she couldn't tell me through HIPAA laws, like their names and stuff, but just her inbox was flooded with parents reaching out. I did not think this was possible. My husband or my wife said, our child could read their mind. We've tested it. We've done this. We've blindfolded. We've put them in different rooms. Like they can always tell you what we're looking at, what we're seeing, what we're thinking. And that was mind boggling. And so then I decided I wanted to do a test on my own. And that's really where episode 1 of the podcast starts. And that was where the film was going to start as well. I brought a family up from Mexico. Dr. Powell had never met. I wanted to be in control of like hiring the crews, finding the location, taking down the mirrors, taking down reflective surfaces, putting GoPros all over the room to find out if this was happening. And it was, inexplicably so. And anyway, so that became a 2.5-year journey of meeting families from all over the world, and not just families, but, siblings, teachers, therapists, speech pathologists, doctors, principals, ministers, so many people involved with non-speakers with autism. Turned that into a sizzle reel for a documentary pitch. And some of the feedback we had gotten was a little, could there be a celebrity or a true crime element, or could we end in a live show? Things like that. And I always told the parents, I said, look, like the most important thing is to get this out right or not do it at all, And so, it really was about the message, not, getting a show on TV or something. So we kind of regrouped after that. And I was a little bit at a loss, like, well, what do we do now? I mean, I kind of felt like I failed them. I was a filmmaker, and it's like, we don't have any options now. I don't know what to do, and kind of just spent like 3 weeks, like thinking about it. And that's when it was like, oh, wait a second. There is a way to get this out to the world without like someone making comments or, trying to pervert, maybe a pervert or exemplify this in a way that wasn't meant to be. And that's when the podcast became a reality. And the irony is now we're moving back to the movie,
Right. It's like a full cycle, trust the intuitive nudge that you're getting called towards. I'm curious how you discovered was Dr. Diane Powell in the first place. So you heard about a lady, or you were getting stories sent to you, or?
No, I mean, it was kind of a, there's a moment, this is how I've noticed the life of a documentary filmmaker is, right? Like often you're stuck on a project, not stuck, like you are immersed in a project for 3 or 4 years. And it's beautiful. There's a ton of development before, there's ever even a dime in funding. You're really committed to it. So I have learned that, kind of the hard way, you really have to make sure that you love what you're working on, because it's going to be so many hours of your life, so many years of your life, often not paid. So I was between these moments where I was like, okay, what's my next project? I had done a ton of social issue stuff and was really kind of weighing that, and was listening to all sorts of different podcasts, just trying to feed my brain. And I heard a podcast called The Cosmos and You, which kind of looks at cutting edge science and theories to really understand consciousness and time and all sorts of interesting questions that we all have about the fabric of our reality. And episode 4, I remember, was about Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell. And I heard that and I thought, should I write this lady? I mean, I felt so nervous. I was writing her out of the blue. That's always the hardest thing, was when you first start to meet subjects and you're coming in as this total interloper being like, hey, I'm interested. They need to learn to trust you, all that stuff. But that's really where, it all began.
Yeah. I think one reason I like the podcast so much was that I'm very skeptical. I have a scientific background. I have a PhD. I don't speak fluent woo-woo as my girlfriend does. She's into, all the stuff. So I was intrigued. I'm like, I'll listen to the first episode of this. And I really appreciate the integrity that you brought to the content, because you name a lot of this. Like, hey, this sounds crazy right now, or hey, I know what you're listening to and I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it, but this is how it happens. And I remember listening to one episode where you came across your cameraman, I think, with his head in his hands, and he said to you something like, do I need to believe in God now? Right? And I felt that in my bones. It gives me goosebumps even as I say that, because the content seems so out there and so different that, like, I don't know what to do with it. And that's one reason I reached out to you to have this chat, was I just wanted to pick your brain about how have you navigated all of this content, and like, how has it changed you? So, I mean, that's a very broad, random softball statement. Is there anything that you want to jump off on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, certainly first walking into this, I mean, I always have like believed in something bigger, but by no means was I the person that was like going to a psychic or, that type of stuff. Like, I thought there was a lot of frauds out there. A lot of things have been manipulated and exploited and used to harm people in vulnerable situations. So I think, like many people, there's that you've had experiences in life, you're like, oh, there's something more that's just odd, or something about your reality might be like a little off, but I just can't access it, but like, definitely, was not at all like wooby in any way. So, so I think when I first saw the telepathy with my own eyes, there's absolutely I mean, that was really something, and of course, like, even after the second day, it's like, okay, what was going on? Like, we took all the screens down, right? Like, we looked back at the footage, like it was cognitive dissonance. So you're trying to reimagine, like, did that really happen? Am I missing something here? And then when I saw it the second time, I mean, that at that point, that was unbelievable, because the young man, Akil, was sitting across the room from his mother. She could look at an image of, we downloaded a random number generator, showed her words, and he could tell you exactly what she was looking at. She could start writing a word, or actually we wrote a lot of the words, and then would cross them out and start writing another one. And he'd start with the one, and then as soon as we crossed it out, it would be a different one. And the thing that really got me, it wasn't just the test, but these mothers' sincerity, because that mother, Manisha, was like, okay, so you saw, I told you. So, like, now tell me what's going on. And there was that issue of like, I have no idea what's going on. And for these parents, the thing that started to really deeply impact me was one after the other and they were siloed. They didn't know each other, from Israel to India to England to Mexico to Canada to America, like all over the States. I've been Denmark. I mean, finding so many parents that were having this experience. No one believes us. The doctors don't believe us. The scientists don't believe us. I found one teacher who had been documenting this for like 30 years with VHS tapes, sending telepathy tests of her students to some of the leading institutions. No one was listening to these people, and they just wanted answers. And for me, that was so convincing, because, the non-speakers, who are the real beautiful human beings that are featured in this project, their lives are really difficult. They're intelligent. They are absolutely competent, but they're born into a world and with a medical system and actually education system that tells the doctors they're not, or tells the parents they're not competent. They're not in there. They'll never communicate. And they get taught like a 4-year-old, when the truth is they are in there, they are competent, they're often way more brilliant than us. They just have a very difficult time controlling their body. And then the parents start to learn that they're in there, and often people don't believe them. And then the technique they use for communicating, spelling, which we dive into in the podcast and really show how that has been so unfairly attacked as being pseudoscience based on, kind of like awful things that happen in the early stages of this with facilitated communication. And now there's not touch involved, but I digress. So these parents have fought the system every which way, that my kid's in there, my kid can communicate. And then they come out with, and my child can read minds and has a whole slew of spiritual gifts. So I think they were tired. They were tired of fighting. They weren't getting anywhere. And just as a mother, as a human being, I realized like this is important, that these people have a voice to share. And pretty quickly, I think it's the huge, overwhelming kind of like orchestra of all these parents, teachers, therapists saying the same thing that becomes the most convincing, even beyond the telepathy tests, which the children are between like 98 and 100% of the time, at least when I tested them. And then, of course, in the tapes, in the Telepathy Tapes podcast, you hear the crew seeing stuff, watching stuff, also going through that cognitive dissonance of like, how is this happening? And it's been a gift, because you can't go through that and it not change you. And now I have no doubt that the way we've conceived of our reality is incorrect. And it's not that what these parents are saying is incorrect. It's just that our reality, how we understand reality, is incorrect.
Mm. Yeah, I think the parents are such pure participants in this project, right? Like they clearly are innocent. They're curious. They have no motive. They're seeking answers. But just backing up for a moment, I would love to hear you describe some of the attributes that these kids have. For example, they can learn languages from the ether. They can read minds. Like, what are some of the things that you saw?
Yeah, what I first was walking into was thinking that this was a documentary about telepathy. And pretty quickly, when the parents would start sending me the emails, and I think that they maybe thought I knew more than I did. So it was pretty overwhelming when the emails would say like, okay, here's the deal. My child can speak a little bit of Hebrew. They can read cuneiform or, hieroglyphics. They can translate and understand like multiple languages. They can play music or understand what sheet music is, like name a song, even if there's no words on it at all. It's just notes, even though they've never had a single music class. They say that they see spirits, that they have communications with people from beyond. They say they go somewhere else at night to learn. And the first email I got like that, which had all these points, I was like, what the F? I mean, it's like, and not that it's not that I didn't believe it. I just didn't know what to make of it, because I had met this mom and she was like, she felt very similar to me, just sort of just now discovering this about her child after she was homeschooled during COVID and all this stuff kind of unraveled about her child and her quote unquote gifts. And then I got another email like that, and then another, and then another, and then another. And then you start seeing that again over and over and over again. And at a certain point, you have to be like, okay, this is either a worldwide conspiracy of parents who are stretched way too thin, working many jobs, up 24/7 with a severely, autistic child, or they're telling the truth. And the thing that what I do love about the spellers, which is kind of like the catch-all term for many of these non-speakers who communicate by pointing to a letterboard, is that, it takes a lot of effort to communicate. You're not going to lie. You're not going to put that much huge effort into pointing to letters, but also they're not motivated by any of the things that the majority of us are, right? They can't ever have careers or autonomy or even agency over their own lives. They can't make money or have a career or, or at least not yet, like necessarily have the educational track that we do, can't have families. So the things that mark and give our life's value, that motivate us and might cause us to deceive or lie, none of that is of interest to them. There's nothing but the honest truth. And that's what I love about this entire group of people is I think they're some of the most raw and authentic human beings you'll meet because they aren't tied to these like earthly pursuits that most of us are.
Exactly. Yeah, The series is just so compelling. And I would listen as a skeptic and just periodically think, like, I don't know what to make of this. I believe what I'm hearing is true. This person sounds reputable. This person sounds genuine and honest and without ulterior motives. And what they're telling me is bananas, is bonkers, is so far beyond how I perceive the world. And you said a moment ago something like reality is wrong, or how we perceive reality is flawed. How has this work shifted the way that you view the world and consciousness?
Yeah. And sort of, the way I kind of really lay out the 9 episodes of the podcast so far is that it goes in the order of kind of my unpeeling of the onion, right? So like the first 4 are like testing, like using our instruments and science and this to try to test. And these aren't Dr. Powell's legit, like airtight Faraday cage tests. This was me trying to prove proof of concept here, right? So anyway, so that was kind of and then the 5th one was really difficult to write because that was like peeling off the onion for people with the teachers receiving this telepathy back from students. Is what they were claiming was that they can hear the words of their students and their ideas and thoughts often in return. Sorry for that noise in the background. They can hear the they can hear the kids back. So that was, again, like really difficult to wrap my head around. But again, once you see the telepathy and you start walking to this world, you start thinking, well, what else have I dismissed? What else have I dismissed? And I'm getting to your question about consciousness and how I see the world. But, I think throughout that journey, there was other things that I totally threw out. For instance, like one young man, this young man and his mother, evangelical, deeply religious family in Georgia, really are against anything like what would be conceived of as, new agey, definitely no rocks or crystals or anything. And one day the mom came home with crystals after a massage, and she thought, why on earth did this woman give this to me? And she kind of like put them up, in her bathroom next to the bathtub. And her son came home from school, like ran through the primary, her bedroom door, then ran through the bathroom door, like grabbed the rocks and was starting to like go really get excited about these stones and started saying, I can feel the stone's energy. He could isolate what each stone was by its vibrational frequency. And I thought, what? Like, this is real? The crystals have real thing? Like, that's true, And so there was things like that throughout that just kept breaking away at me. And then, the big question for me, my science mind was, well, okay, so then what? Like, if this is wrong, then what is wrong, right? And so episode 6 is really the episode that kind of like breaks the roof off of that question. And I think many scientists have gotten to this point. And to back up really quick, the theory of materialism is what has really shaped our world for the past, 400 years or so. And it's this idea that the only things that are real are what can be, measured and observed, and that's it. And, in materialism, if you think about it like a pyramid, it's like, there's physics and biology, and there's, psychology and all these things that lead to like our environment, our human experience. And at the top of the pyramid is consciousness, and no one can describe how it's there or why it's there or what it does and where it comes from. And in this model, none of the things make sense that we're exploring in the podcast. Telepathy doesn't, near-death experiences don't, psi abilities like clairvoyance or, stuff like that certainly doesn't. The ability of like rocks to impact you. I mean, all of that would be bonkers. And it's why most of the world perceives those things as bonkers, is because in our worldview that we've all grown up in, materialism, that stuff is impossible. And so what I started finding were scientists who were really respected chairs of their department who at some point along the way came into data that wasn't jiving with materialism. One of the things that's the easiest to look at is savant skills, especially acquired savant skills. Like, how is it that someone has a huge head injury and suddenly, because they were mugged or they fell or they were hit with by a car or whatever it is, they can now see math in everyday objects and fractals and water? Or how can this person now play music even though they've never been able to play music? Or they become an unbelievable art savant. Well, you can't really explain that, right? That makes no sense. And things like telepathy or being able to like see what's going to happen in the future is impossible. So, but what these scientists have come to the conclusion of is it is all possible if consciousness is the base of the pyramid, it's the foundation of everything, and then our whole world is actually mental, and everything that has, evolved out of it, the physical, is came after. It's not the consciousness came last, it came first. And if we start to look at the world that way, we don't have to throw out most of our textbooks. They still remain. It's just reordering the pyramid of consciousness and material. So I have come to deeply believe that consciousness is fundamental. And if we look at things that way, all of this becomes possible. And, I just want to quickly add, obviously I've been reading like a master's level class on a lot of this stuff. And if you go back in time, I mean, this was always considered part and parcel of the human experience, whether you're looking at like Celtics or Vikings or Native Americans or, shamans or, you go back into pretty much any culture, the, quote unquote telepathic abilities or PSI psi skills were used for the hunt, were used for spiritual practices, were used to connect with one another, were used to convey information. I mean, this is stuff that they would never think to prove as true. It's like trying to prove love is real. It was just part of an experience of being alive. And I don't think it's that I've discovered something new or brought something new to the public. I think we're all just rediscovering this part of ourselves that is in there that we've hacked away at and turned away from because language and technology made it easier to do so.
Have you heard of a podcast called The Emerald?
No.
So it might be up your alley. There's an episode where I think the title is Animism is Normative Consciousness. This idea that things just have consciousness, plants, trees, rivers, etc. And how throughout history, 99% of cultures believe that to be true. And then it's just ours, this modern capitalistic material-based approach that is different. And his point was like, what if we opened our eyes and our hearts and our souls a little bit to the 99 percentile? And like, maybe we're just not seeing things in the way they are.
Yeah.
It sounds like that's what's occurring. But I'm curious, in your reading, is there one or two books that stood out that you recommend or suggest?
Yeah, I mean, definitely Rupert Sheldrake's Dogs Know When You're Coming Home is a really great one. Dean Radin's Entangled Minds is wonderful. Yeah, I mean, anything by Rupert Sheldrake or Dean Radin is great. The doctor in the podcast, Diane Hennessy Powell, wrote The ESP Enigma. That's a great one. Dr. Marjorie Wolcott, I think her work is called The Conscious Universe, but hers was wonderful. And she became the head of the post-materialist, kind of scientist academy, which is like, hey, a lot of us scientists, kind of like Martin Luther went and put the things on the door, like nailed the, was like, we don't believe in materialism anymore. We're starting our own academy of sciences that's looking at post-materialism, this idea that consciousness is fundamental. And she was a hard-nosed materialist. She thought anyone who believed in any of this stuff was weak-minded, silly. And then she had her own experiences with meditation, just being like, wait a second, how can this clearing my mind change my body? And how can this type of stuff be happening? It made her kind of look on the side at near-death experiences, start to look at the data around some of these psi abilities, the tests that have been done. And she started realizing, wait a second, if you just look, there's a lot of this stuff here. There's a lot of information. It's not that it's buried or it hasn't been tested. There's an ample research on it. It's just that it hasn't gotten out there because the people who are controlling scientific journals are materialists. So anyway, Marjorie Wolcott's book is great as well.
Yeah. What has the response been to your podcast? I imagine you're getting a lot of publicity. I imagine you're getting a lot of attention, a lot of probably pushback and tomatoes thrown your way as well. How's it been?
It's been beyond, I think, my wildest, comprehension. I just can't even begin to explain how humbled and exciting it's been, not just for me. I mean, myself aside, I think for the families, because like on TikTok, right, there's people posting left and right about the podcast. And, it's like, a girl like in her car with her big gulp and the woman on this chairlift and, all the random things people are doing on TikTok. I'm so excited just for the families and teachers who've been dismissed and ignored for years, seeing that on Twitter. It's just exploded. We found out it's number 2 on the documentary charts right now. We've not put a dime in any type of promotion, not a dime in marketing. We just didn't have a dime, it was all a labor of love. And the fact that it's like, up there, number 2 on the charts just because it's gone viral. My podcast producer Jen sent me images of how it's performing around the world, and it's been in over 100. It's being downloaded in over 120 countries. So to see that this message is kind of spreading through like Kuwait and Uganda and Sri Lanka and Brazil, it's just really cool. And I know that the spellers, are just so happy it's getting out there, that their message, their truth, and I think that, they've known this for a long time. I think it's one of the best kept secrets in the world. And I'm not saying that in some lofty way. I think that's true. Like, so many people involved in this community have known that they could read minds and have these gifts, and that no one could talk about it because it feels so out there. And now, of course, I believe in so much more than ever before. And I strongly believe that it's out there now because the spellers believe we're ready for it. And I can tell they're ready. People are ready for it because the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Like, every once in a while, one of the families will be like, I looked on Reddit. I'm like, don't ever do that. Like, never, ever do that. Like, I don't do it. You should never do it. Yeah. And they're like, no, it's really great. Like, people are so excited and they're blah, blah, blah. And I'm engaging with the people. It's great. They have their autonomy to do whatever they want to do. But the fact that even Reddit hasn't been like a big downer for them to look at has been just wonderful,
I think it's a credit to you as well as the content creator to have created something that has resisted the tomatoes. I say that as a content creator myself, where it's challenging and I expect pushback all the time. And I think you've done a really commendable job in the content of addressing some of the potential tomatoes, which makes it more convincing by just naming the thing. Like, hey, this sounds wild. Hey, this sounds crazy. Hey, I know what you're thinking right now, right? And it's all the more compelling.
Yeah.
Can we transition to talking about The Hill?
Yeah,
because
sure.
when you were talking about the enthusiasm and support for the podcast, I recall in one of the episodes that there was a large gathering on the Hill and that people were very excited and there was strong numbers and support. And I just, that to me just took it to another place in my brain where I was already mesmerized and enthralled. And I was like, oh, of course. Now it just kind of goes up a notch or two. So what's The Hill? And maybe even backing up a moment, is there anything that people should hear before we start talking about The Hill?
There should be, yes. And I think that, again, came to me. I thought when I first started hearing these reports coming into to Dr. Powell, and then eventually they started coming to me as well. At first my inclination was, oh, well, these are like a few really unbelievable individuals with gifts. How cool. I wonder how maybe there's 10 in the world. And after, I think episode 2 ends with this young man, Akil, who could do telepathy across the room and such, writing to me, all non-speakers have this gift. Well, I'm afraid of the word all in any context. Many, all, never. Like, those are things you just never say. And what I have learned from spellers is they pick their words very wisely. It takes a lot of energy to point to letters, to control their body, to do that. So that was interesting to me. And then the next episode, the next kind of family groups I meet are all based in Atlanta. And the mother I really met first was this wonderful human being, Katie Asher, and her son, Houston. Katie lived for 20 years without knowing her son was in there. He didn't learn to spell openly until he was in his 20s. So she went through hell, just felt like a, outsider in the whole world, felt like she could never go anywhere because she didn't want to bother people because her son was making noises, just had a really tough life. So anyway, Houston learns to spell. Then he says, I can read your mind. And then he eventually communicates to his mother. All of us can do this. Any unreliably or non-speaking person with autism can do this. And she was like, oh, okay. Same with me, didn't know what to believe. But she asked a friend, one of her friends that she'd met, Libby, who also had a non-speaking autistic son. And Libby kind of was like, well, if I hide the Halloween candy, he knows where it is. If I think about it, if I'm craving nuts, he'll show up with nuts. If I'm sad and having negative self-talk, he'll start crying and often kicking and freaking out. So she's like, yeah, I've always felt like we were deeply connected, but telepathy. And Katie's like, well, let's do a test. And, wrote down a number or something like that, showed it to Libby, and then John Paul across the room boom, 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 starts typing the number. And they did a few tests. Okay, John Paul can do it too. So they start to realize, okay, this is a lot of us. Well, anyway, at some point, Houston confides to his mom, we actually all often will hang out. And I call it the talk on the hill. And it's a place where we can kind of telepathically tune into and go to and hang out and support each other. And I think to Katie, one of the primary mother moments here is that like my kid's not as lonely as I thought they might have been, because so often it's this fear with spellers that very few people can communicate with them. There's not many friends or social groups. And here he is saying, oh, I hang out with my buddies on this place called the Hill. And so Libby asked John Paul about it. And he'd been doing something for a long time, which she never could understand, which was after school, he'd run up to his bedroom or his parents' bedroom and stack pillows on his head to block out all the noises in the house. And he said to his mom, yeah, that's when I go on the hill. And so when I first saw this, my first trip to Atlanta, I was really not sure how to form an opinion of it in my brain yet. I mean, it was just so out there. I didn't dismiss it by any means. I believe these parents, they're the most honest, bearers of this news, but it was just so out there. And so, but
and
then
just to jump in and reiterate there, what we're saying is these telepathic children who cannot speak have said that all of them can not only read minds, but go to a silent place and through their minds connect with each other in the ether and communicate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So what happened, I'd say, throughout the next 2 years was my opinion on of the Hill formed pretty rapidly and deeply and distinctly because it kept being corroborated by totally outside sources. Like at one point, a teacher had reached out and she had just discovered that her children in her classroom were seeing spirits. That's how it kind of unfolded for her. And then they started talking about that, and then they revealed that they can read minds, and then they revealed to her that we go to a place called the Hill, and that some of the younger ones who aren't even spelling yet go there more often. And she started telling all this stuff to me, and I was shocked because I'm like, the Hill? Like, did you say the Hill, like Hill? And she's like, yeah, do you know what that is? And I'm like, I've heard of it, but it was really interesting. And then I met someone totally in a different side of the world, which was a mega church like minister. Well, he kind of ran the youth, children's with disability kind of like youth ministry at this big church in Arizona. I got on the phone with him because he's like, oh yeah, I've learned like a lot of these kids have these gifts, and I've seen the telepathy firsthand. I've seen some of these children predict things and they come true, and whether that's like an international crisis or an injury with a parent, just all sorts of stuff. So he's talking to me and he's like, and you know what? They have little inside things that I don't even know about, and we don't know how they know about it, and their parents don't know. He's like, just the other day, I was connecting one of my spellers at my church with this other speller in Minnesota, and we got them on the Zoom. And right when they're getting off, one says to the other, spells to the other, meet me at the Hill sometime. And he's like, can you believe that? What are they talking about? I mean, they had no idea. And I was like, oh, yeah, we can talk about that another time, And then I met an Orthodox Jewish man who lives in Israel in a very ultra-Orthodox community. And I sheepishly told him about this because he's been following this for 20 years. His non-speaking son is, also a non-speaker, has said, yes, I have access to a lot of information. I can also communicate telepathically. And his father, Arthur, confirmed for me that there's a hill in Israel. And that tends to be mostly, the Jewish community. And some people have written me from Arizona, Florida, and been like, there's a few different hills. There's not just one. And in episode 10, we really kind of come through with a big revelation. I was actually just editing this morning, which is a volunteer in a classroom that's, a voice user like you and me ends up making it to the Hill, getting there. So I have been really, that's been sort of a interesting thing to watch, is how many people are fascinated. Like I've seen on like different like little hashtags on Twitter and stuff where people like meet me at the Hill. It's like kind of taking a world like on a life of its own. But there have been so many people that have been talking about it throughout the country and the world that don't know each other again. Like that, what do you make of that except for believing it? And what do the non-speakers have to gain by lying about that and faking it? Like I said, they're not motivated by the same things we are.
Have you considered or planned ways to test the Hill?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So right now we're currently starting to talk to investors, donors in earnest about the documentary, which we want to start filming next year. And one of the most exciting parts of that is trying to also fundraise for Dr. Powell's research. And she wants to do two things. One is we want to do like formal, airtight, university-backed telepathy tests with a child or parent in a Faraday cage, with observers, the whole 9 yards, so that can be captured and talked about in scientific journals and added to the record, But the other thing we want to do is test the hill. And I can't wait to do that, because I watch it, anecdotally in my own life, where one parent will say, actually, I was with one of the non-speakers at Disneyland. Her family came to LA for a vacation, and I was with her, and she said something to me at lunch. She spelled something. And then the next day I got the exact message, worded the exact same, from another girl in Atlanta. And I thought, what on earth? And her parents were like, they're talking on the hill a lot, these two. In fact, we did a Zoom call so they could meet each other. And they were like really annoyed, kind of. And the parents were like, well, we really had a fun time getting to know each other. We should do this again sometime. And their girls were kind of spelling like, you can, like, we don't need to. We do something else. And the parents said that on the Zoom call, they had like funny inside jokes going on. One would spell like the prince, and the other one would be like the handsome knight or whatever, like happening in like two different living rooms. It's like they were talking to each other, but they weren't. And it's just enough things have happened where I'm like, okay, like this is inexplicable, but yeah, we plan to test it. And I can't wait to have that. And again, I think we're going to try to bring QEEG scanners with us when we do test it. We'll have someone, I believe, from the University of Virginia with us. So
plans are afoot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What's that?
Plans are afoot. Things are happening.
Yes. Yeah.
I was listening to this series. So I have a new daughter in my life. And so thanks. So she's 12 weeks now, but about, a month ago, 8 weeks ago, I was, whenever I could find some time, which is a challenge, I was listening to these episodes, and I was thinking about reality and consciousness and communication, and I'm staring at this little external fetus sitting on my lap, who periodically would just gaze off into the ether, staring at something, and would lock on for longer than I thought was normal. And I would say to her, like, are you on the hill? Like, where are you right now? Like, what do you see? Do you see the ancestors? We started calling them your friends. Like, oh, do you see your friends? Like, are they in the room with us now? Or do you see great-great-grandma? Is she here? Or my grandma? Is she here? And so when you just said that all non-speakers on the spectrum access it, I'm intrigued by the idea of like, can babies tune into that? Like, are they still connected? How's this work?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is that I spent a lot of time kind of getting to know this wonderful woman in England. Her name is Nicola Farmer, and she has something called the ICU Academy. And what she does is she teaches neurotypical children to see while blindfolded. And I thought, how is on earth? And like, I watched some videos of this, and these kids are doing puzzles. And I started bringing this up to some of the scientists that I talked to, especially like there's a materialist scientist at Cambridge University. So again, smart, brilliant people. And I said, have you ever heard anything like this? Is this possible? This was in my research phase, before I really started tumbling into the rabbit hole. And he said, oh yeah, in China, that's happening all the time. The kids will play basketball blindfolded. There's all these schools. There's a school in Arizona that does this. In Germany, they're teaching some blind people to do it. Now they can go on the subway and read the maps. And I'm like, but they don't have eyes. Like, and these other kids are blindfolded. How is this possible? And I don't know how it's possible, but one of the things that's a tenet of these schools is they often will say, like, you kind of can't learn this anymore after the age of like 9 or 8, like, or 10, maybe at the latest. Like, there's this window before you become too practically minded, before your ego becomes fully formed, before that division between you and the rest of the world becomes a rock solid wall, that these things can be accessed and tapped into and learned. And then that window kind of closes, or at least it becomes much harder to access those parts of ourselves. So of course, I mean, it seems, yes, there's something with youth that is beautifully important and pliable and can access. Again, I don't think any of this is paranormal or supernatural. It is normal. It is natural. we've just become really defiantly, stubbornly skeptical to the point that we've talked ourselves out of ourselves, really.
Yeah, I think it's as if our skepticism has solidified into closed-mindedness in a
Yeah.
sense, right?
Yeah.
The death of curiosity, the death of possibility. And I was just considering a future whereby our kids go to preschool and they learn their shapes and they finger paint, and then they have their intuitive session, and then they have to practice mind reading. And what an interesting future
Yeah.
that might be. Um,
It is. And I think once you realize that these gifts are all within us, and, in the telepathy tapes too, in episode 5, really, we delve deep into animal telepathy, that this is like part and parcel of the animal kingdom. And it has been studied, it has been researched. None of this is new. None of this is abnormal, right? But there was a beautiful, again, I was editing episode 10 today, and I part of that episode, I checked in with this classroom in Chicago. And one of the things since the telepathy tapes came out that the teacher started realizing she should do with her students was give them some time of thought sharing, is what they're calling it. And I love there's like a new title for it, where the kids can, and often for a lot of non-speakers, again, the difficulty to control their body. One of the things I've come to love the soundtrack of non-speakers is often a lot of loud noises, a lot of grunts, it's kind of stimming with the body. It can be very loud. And again, like, to me now, it's like a beautiful soundtrack. But she was saying that they'll do this 10-minute of thought sharing. And during those 10 minutes, the room becomes dead silent, just quiet. And they're all sitting there sharing thoughts together. And she said, I know they do this on the Hill. They talk about they do this all the time. Sometimes they have times to meet up. But she's like, when they're sitting in the room, they seem to really like it. It's like a different, profound, beautiful thing. And it's the only time of the day they're quiet. And I just thought, how cool that is entering a classroom somewhere, and that people are starting to be like, okay, these students need this. This will really help them get kind of in their bodies, get excited, get connected before the day starts. It's like, my 5-year-old and 10-year-old go out to recess and run around. Like, we need that, right? To like get our wiggles out or whatever. And I love that the non-speakers is like, give them a little moment of thought sharing. And, I don't want to other them in any way. I think they're just like us inside of the ability to control their body and their heightened ability to access these parts of themselves. But I agree with you. How cool if we all started incorporating this into our education.
yeah. And it's interesting because it brings up various ethical concerns around privacy and security, and are my thoughts my own? And how do we navigate? That's a couple steps down the road, but
Well, the other thing too is, I think what a lot of spellers would say is like, if you're kind and loving and honest and transparent in all these ways we should be, that shouldn't be anyone's concern. Honestly, I like, and I think, I have found, like, I think working with spellers, I think a lot of people eh, clean their own attic pretty quickly, because like, what secrets do we need to be keeping, honestly? And one of the things that I thought was so great that one of the spellers in England had said at one point was, or I think explained to me, if you say a word, you say a word. Like, I think a lot of the non-speakers I've met find language to be this cumbersome weight. In fact, there's one young man I know of in England who was a high functioning autistic man who could use his voice. And in his 30s, he decided to stop using it because he decided words were just too cumbersome and clunky and boring and small, and the way it was described to me once is like, if you say the word, right? If I say Thanksgiving to you, I said the word Thanksgiving. If someone telepathically sends that or receives it, right? It is the smells, it's the family, it's the music, it's the football in the background, it's the weather, it's the someone coming in the front door, it's sleeping in your childhood bed again, it's all the things, it's memories of grandma, it's like your uncle who falls asleep, it's all of it, and you have this whole sense of what this means to someone. And if we could all be communicating like that, just, can you imagine how often, just the word, the saying, how are you today? How often do you lie when you answer that? So much of our language is dotted with sarcasm and white lies and withholding and untruths. And it sounds really lofty and all this stuff, but I don't think it is. I think if we really try to calibrate our minds, um, it would really elevate us to be kind, more considerate, more loving, less selfish people. And I think if someone is existing in that space, then thought sharing isn't scary. It's only scary if you're trying to hurt someone, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Or plan a surprise party for them.
Well, yeah. And that was like one of the things I would say when I first started this work, the cutest to me, like the most darling things that would happen were the concerns that parents had beyond like, my kids can read my mind. It was this, ready? There were three things. Like, I cannot hide Christmas presents and Halloween candy, or, Hanukkah presents, whatever, birthday presents. You can't hide anything because if you think about it, they'll find it. So that was a big, big concern. Another big, big concern was homework, which was like, oh, like, I don't know if they're actually learning this or if they're taking it from my mind. So when we're doing homework, I have to be listening to music or thinking of something else or saying a word in my head, or have no idea what the answer is at all and be doing it with them. So like, that was a big concern. It comes up all the time, like how to get them to be not taking the easy way out and just really learning, because they're smart. I mean, the non-speakers are brilliant, but we're all human beings, right? It's like, oh, mom's thinking that, here's the answer. I want to go on YouTube. And then the third one, which I thought was really interesting, was, I think for a lot of people with this level of autism, where you're having a really hard time, again, like connecting your mind and your body, there can be these impulses that are impossible to stop. And one of those can be eating. So there's often like locks on cabinets and fridges and all that stuff. And I've heard so many parents say, like, can I think about where the lock is? Or like the key is, or, oh, I want to go get food. And they think about where the key is. All of a sudden, like, their child is there, like opening up the cabinet, like licking all the salt off the Doritos or whatever. And that became a real transparent moment of, this is real, because when I was hearing those little concerns about just the inner workings of their home, trying to handle mind reading and telepathy, again, you can do as many 4-digit tests as you want, but when you hear those stories from multiple parents all over the world, it's like, yeah, okay, something's happening, and it's hard.
Yeah, it's almost like, what's the term? Anecdata, right?
Yeah,
Like
it is. That's exactly
these
it.
random anecdotal things that you keep hearing
Mhm.
and hearing and hearing, and at some point,
Mhm.
like, okay,
Right.
there's something here, right?
Right. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
I suppose one way I've been trying to piece this together for myself in some kind of coherent structure. It's like always the desire for structure for me, of like, how's this work? Like, what's happening?
Yep.
Like, where
Yeah.
can I rest my hat on this information? Is this idea that, to hear things, you need ears, and you need the bones inside your ears, and to see things, you need eyes, and you have a nose so you can smell stuff. And that doesn't mean that we're done with all the stuff that's out there, right? I don't have an antenna, so I can't understand radio waves in my brain, right? And perhaps these kids, or all babies, or whomever, has the infrastructure somehow available to them to access, as you said, the foundational infrastructure of the universe, which is consciousness. And they
Mhm.
just have the eyes or the ears equivalent, and that allows them to go to these places. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, no, I think it's a great question. I don't know. I mean, and
Yeah,
it's almost, eyes don't see, our brains see, right? It's like our eyes bring in light. So if you could find a
right.
different way to bring in that light, right? It's like our ears. I mean, our brains are doing the hearing and seeing and tasting in a way. But you're right. There's stuff that helps, like between taste buds and eardrums, and but you can bypass that now with some, a colloquial implant. It's just tricky. It's all, and I don't have the answers. I'm not a scientist, but I just know that there's more that's possible. And I do think I don't know if I read this or if I thought of it like while trying to understand a metaphor to understand some of this myself. But, I think so often with consciousness, you think, oh, well, okay, well, then why, if a brain injury, is that person not there anymore, or this or that or that? And like at some point, this metaphor came into my worldview, which was like, if you, in order to make music, right? Imagine that as like life or consciousness, right? You need, like, let's say, the piano, and you also need the pianist. So if our bodies are like the piano, like that has all this equipment, it's all there, it's great. But like it will not work unless like this consciousness from somewhere else comes in and like animates it and makes the beautiful thing that the two can only do together, which is music. And so I feel like that's kind of the relationship between whatever you want to call it, collective consciousness, our outside consciousness, our soul, that and our body creates like this local sense of consciousness and being and life.
Yeah. Yeah. How has this work or this project changed you day to day? Like, are there things that you do differently now, or are there ways that you interact with people in a different capacity? Like, has it shifted you at a deeper level?
I think the way that I interact with people has pretty much stayed the same. Yeah, I think the sense just that I know there's more. And I personally now, after what I have seen and experienced, feel as though I have proof that the soul or like our consciousness continues, that that we do not die and that we probably came from somewhere before we got here. Like that, I think is the biggest part of this that has affected me, was this idea that like we are not in the base reality. There's a different reality that's more real than here. And some people could say, okay, that's proof of heaven. Some people could say that's proof of the simulation, right? That someone else is creating us and that we are living this in these like avatar bodies. I actually think the two complement each other. I think the same can be true. And what's fascinating is when I kind of got to that just by what I've understood and listened to through working with these families and teachers and of course the non-speakers, but also, again, if you go into the near-death experience data and books, and there's so much, people will often talk about, well, wherever I went was more real than here. Like that felt like home. In fact, I didn't want to go back when I saw my body there. I was just like, oh gosh, go back into that like heavy, awful. No, this is more real. I want to be here. And that I think is the number one thing that I feel confident in now, where I don't fear death at all. I don't even fear my loved ones dying. I mean, I love them very much and I want them with me, but that's a huge change when that happens.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah, a little bit. I love that just you're a documentary filmmaker a couple years ago and you're like, oh, yeah, maybe I'll email this lady. And then fast forward 3 years later and you're like, oh, creativity is eternal and death isn't real. And we don't ever die. And consciousness is eternal as well. And it's like,
it's really weird. And, you know, I think back even just because I also direct TV commercials and like I'd be on a set with a client or something. They'd be like, well, what are you working on? Like, what's your new film or project? And I'd be working on this. And of course I made the calculus all the time. Like, how do I talk about this with people? They're going to think I'm really out there. And even not wanting to talk to like my mother-in-law who lives, you know, on a large sheep farm in rural Minnesota, like just a lot of people. I was like, this is really going to weird them out. Or, you know, like women at school who I know are like the moms who are like really like religious or something. I'm like, oh gosh, they can't know. They're going to think this is like really bad. You know, it's just like whether people judge it because it's woo-woo or judge it because they think it's dangerous or dark, or people who judge it just because of they think they're going to think that I'm not smart. And I pride myself on being like intelligent, you know? So I think all these things, I felt really, really scared to talk about it. And then it was just like, okay, like, boop, like put the podcast out there. And there was even that element of like, okay, I want certain people to hear it, but not others, because what are they going to think? And now it's just like, whatever. It's like coming out of the closet in a way. It's just like, great, I feel free. And now you have all the information and you can make your own decision. And my whole argument is laid out there. And now I feel very comfortable in this pursuit and very at home in it all.
It's amazing. You're like, oh, death? No, that's not that bad. Oh, putting this podcast out in the world? That's terrifying. That scares me. Talking to my mother-in-law about what I'm working on? That's not great. I don't want to talk about that.
Oh, man.
So then,
she's before, and she's like, oh, well, it's very interesting. You're asking people to really, really believe a lot.
Yeah, it's a big leap. And I think, you know, again, like you've navigated that leap really well. And just to follow up on the death thing, when you say, I'm not scared of death, I'm not scared of my loved ones dying, what would be the reason or the justification for those beliefs? Because
I don't think they go away anymore. I don't think I go away. I mean, that's the one thing the non-speakers talk about a lot. And I'm finding that when I was doing this final episode. So when people are like, what does she keep talking about this final episode? Like 1 through 9 was kind of the narrative arc I wanted to put out there. That's done. That's out there. And then the 10th one was like, okay, these are the words from the non-speakers. Now that this is out there, what did I get wrong? Like, fact check me. What do you want people to know? What do you want people to do? Like, what do we all do with this collective information? And going back through, there's so much content. I thought, oh, this will be easy. It's like hours and hours and hours that I've received. I'm trying to pin it down to 40 minutes, but that I digress. So what many are talking about is not just telepathy and thought sharing and, love and kindness and all these very important things, but so many of them are talking about spirits and seeing them and hearing from them. But this was even weirder. Not weirder, just fascinating. Quite a few had also been talking about, like, you have to know how you feel, because it's not just your thoughts that go out there that other people are receiving, and thoughts become things, but it's how your feelings are out there. And if you don't actualize them and handle them and make right with them, like, those will linger, and they will linger even when you're gone. And by not taking care of your feelings, like, you create a mess for the rest of us. And a few non-speakers were like, that's like what I'm doing here. I'm processing all those negative feelings that you haven't handled. And that was interesting to read, just how important that is. And then quite a few non-speakers talk about ancestors a lot. And I come from my family has a really sordid history on the Dickens side, and it's not one that I'm proud of. And I've never really been keen on ancestry. My mom was like an immigrant from Sweden. So I just feel like I've got 2 cousins, and like my uncles were really distant and didn't really know us. And that's it. Like, so ancestry, I feel like no one in heaven except for maybe like 3 people that are related to me and care. And so that was really weird to be like, they keep talking about ancestors, like watching over this right there. All these people are right there. We can't see them, but they're right there. And I don't know what that means. I'm just reporting what they're telling me, but it's enough that it makes me think, okay, they're not saying people are gone. They're not saying that, like, when you die, like, you're never heard from again. So that means that we'll be here still, is how I'm interpreting it. I know it's a lot.
That this literally is heaven.
I think I don't know about that. I think that
where you go after you die, people would say religiously, you go up or down, you go to heaven or hell. And I've never heard
one of them ever talk about hell, by the way. Ever. It's never come up, not once. The things I have heard them talk about are different realms, and heaven is one of them. And many said they will travel to heaven at night and learn things, including literature, see how time works. But others will talk about going to a realm where all information is kept, and that you can ask any question and they'll go get an answer for you, or for themselves. That is fascinating. And again, like, I've seen that transpire, which is unbelievable. A young man in England
where that's transpired.
Like with Asher, in England, he works really closely with a teacher, and she's actually written a book about it. And it's I forgot the name of the book. Her name is Jess, Jes. But I'll send it to you so you can post about it. But yeah, she would ask all sorts of information, and he could say he could get her anything she needed to know from the realms. And Kyle, who's a musician in England, Kyle's mom did not know he could play an instrument until he was in his 20s. And then she decided, I should get him music therapy. And then he picks up an instrument. Turns out he's perfect pitch. He could play any instrument and any song. And she'd say, Kyle, how do you know songs you've never been taught? Or anything I mention, you can just go. And he's like, well, I'll just go into the realm and and download it, more or less. So and then there's a young man, Anthony, in Wisconsin, and he talks about multiple dimensions. And that's the stuff where it gets like really sci-fi for me and really confusing. Like, that is, it kind of, I'm not doubting them. It just scares me a little bit because I have no handle on it. I can't explain it. I don't know what it means. But they all talk about multiple dimensions unfolding at once, time being spherical, not linear. All time is happening at once. They can see things and slide through time and see different things. And every non-speaker will say they have different gifts, and I haven't, again, but like, these are just things that have come up over and over again to the point where it's not dismissible.
Yeah, I remember one of the episodes, I think, touched on reincarnation, and It said something like, yes, it exists, but not in the way that you consider it, because there is no past or future. It's all happening at once.
Mm-hmm.
That was a
Yeah,
moment where I like looked out the car window as I was driving and was like, I'm sorry, what did you, rewind that? Go
I know.
back. Thanks for spinning me out into this existential crisis with that one-liner.
I
And the other
know.
one was the idea that creativity is eternal, that
Yeah.
there are just these hats, if I'm remembering this right, these hats that you could travel to these realm and put on this hat, or you could put their hand over a book and just have all the information.
And, those are specific to two different individuals. And Houston, that was how he described heaven. He said that he would travel to heaven and that he saw all sorts of things. He said he saw the gears of time and he understood how that happened. And he'd say he'd see sparks flying out, like the ideas, all ideas are generated there and like spark out. And then he talked about he could put on hats at one of the times that he was in this place and was learning about stuff, and that all the hats had different books, and that he could put on a different hat and absorb. And it was really interesting because it'd be like Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, or Mark Twain. And, and his mom was like a single mom of 5, had a really downbeat abusive husband. She had a son with severe autism. Like, she was working many jobs, worked in a pizza parlor, mortgage. I mean, she was so stretched thin. She wasn't reading like Fitzgerald, to her kids. She just wasn't. And Houston was being taught at school like he was a toddler. So Katie didn't even know it, what was in the Fitzgerald books. And, but then Houston would start quoting from them and talk about the themes. And it's just, and then what I found, which I actually love, is like people who really start to tumble into this world, and it certainly happened to me, is then you'll be like, wait a second, but like, did he really go there and put this on? Or was he grabbing that information from someone else in his periphery? Like, because he can pluck into their consciousness? Or did he like pick up a book and absorb it? And then like, none of those are actually within our materialist paradigm of making sense. So whatever door you walk through is a door that's going to completely cause cognitive dissonance and blow up your world,
Yeah. Yeah, no, it feels that way. I just imagine as a parent taking your child who can't speak, who has had, decades of life, and you take them to this music therapy lesson thinking you're going to help, and they just pick up a guitar and start jamming, perfectly. How much of a, for lack of a better phrase, a head fuck or mind fuck, like that would be for a parent to just be like, wait, you're quoting The Great Gatsby to me? Like, what? How? Where?
Well, and that the young man who started picking up instruments and starting to play them, I love his story. And they're in the spelling episode 8, where we really dive into the history of spelling. And the reason I wanted to put him in that episode is because his mom was like, we never learned to spell. We didn't need to. And I thought, well, okay, how? Why? And she said, because he comes to me in dreams and he's taught me how to lucid dream. And then he'll start talking. And the first time it happened, she's like, you're talking, Kyle. Like, I can hear you. And he would tell her important information about stuff he needed medically or other information that was relevant. And so she started believing this. And the first time it happened, he had like done something with an ace of spades, I believe, in the dream, and cut it up like a snowflake and looked into it, did something really weird that kind of got her into a lucid dream state. And he kind of explained to her, like, this is how I'm going to talk to you from now on. Like, remember this in the morning. And when I show you an ace of spades, or I put something, an object into your hand, that's your cue to go into lucid dreaming with me. And well, she woke up the next morning because this had never happened before and thought it was a dream. And then he comes into the kitchen and looks at her and, with eager eyes, and then runs and gets an ace of spade, shows it to her. And after that, she's like, okay. Well, anyway, once again, like fast forward, she didn't know he was musical, and until that was brought into his periphery, around the age of 20. And I think this ace of spade story happened when he was young, like 8 or 9 or so. And what I love is that once he started playing songs, she was realizing, oh, well, he sings songs all the time, but I guess that, and his songs have meaning. And one of the first songs he started singing a lot when she realized he was musical was, dream. Like, whenever you need me, or whenever I want you, all I have to do is dream. And we have the original recording of like the first time he sang that. And then she realized, like, oh, like what he has been singing and what he's singing is a message. Like he's telling me something.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful.
It's unreal. Actually, I asked a buddy of mine. So I found this podcast devoured it, sent it to all my friends. Like, you have to listen to this so we could talk about this. And one of my friends I reached out to and said, hey, I'm having Ky on the podcast. What should I ask her? And he said, where's episode 10? That was his question, because as we're recording this, episode 10 is not out yet.
Yeah.
But I think that as a testimonial for what you're producing sums it up. And even I'll be making dinner and my partner will say to me, hey, is the new Telepathy Tapes out yet? And I'm like, no, it hasn't dropped yet. You know, like there's an eagerness.
And that's sweet. And, you know, I was so nervous about time, like getting out a week after week. And then I realized, because I had like a lead up of 4 months to do the first few before I dropped them. I had 4 in the can. And then I realized like they were really hard. Like they take a month to like kind of edit each one. Because it's like almost like editing a movie kind of, you know, at least that's how I approach it. Because that's the only thing I know how to actually edit. I actually use edit. People will die. I'm actually editing this in like Adobe Premiere, you know, which is so funny because it's like, these are my tools I know. And so with episode 10, of course I want it out like immediately, but you know, there was Thanksgiving and then it's like the holidays. But then beyond that, it's been waiting for so many of the spellers to send me their information, and then they'll send it often, or their, you know, their communication partner will in like a chunk. And then I want to write back and say, do you want this recorded? Do you want a parent to read it? Do you want a digital talker? Like just to make sure I get it right. So it will be out before December 23rd.
Amazing.
That much I promised.
Yeah.
I know it's a long time.
No, it's all good. And you know, what is time? It's all happening at once, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you feel any additional pressure now that you've got more eyeballs and ear holes on your work? Or are you approaching it the same way?
In fact, the thing that really dislodges me is almost like the past few weeks here, as it's been like waiting for the spellers to get their words to me and, you know, et cetera, not totally working on 10 yet. That's really started in earnest this week. During that time, I felt the most strange because it was just like the deluge of like emails and excitement and stuff happening. And that feels foreign and scary to me. What is really comfortable is working on an episode and just getting into that flow state and feeling so at home. Like there is this beautiful thing that happens in my body when I'm working on it. And I just feel connected to the non-speakers and this overall message. And it's really beautiful in a way that I can't describe ever happening before with a project. And so working on the episodes, I feel great. I can't wait to start working on a season 2, you know?
Yeah. And then as we're wrapping up, I recall on your website, you said you're not working on a film, but rather you're creating a movement, something like that. And so as we close, is there anything that you want to leave us with, or any request or any message or anything that I haven't asked you that you're like, man, why didn't you throw me this one, Jeremy?
No, I mean, I think if anyone takes anything away from the podcast, besides the fact that our paradigm is incorrect, which is definitely a thesis I'm trying to present, is that just to presume competence. You know, if you see a non-speaker out in the world, which usually is someone who's not able to communicate well and might have a very difficult time controlling their body, you know, I think first glance, often it's easy for someone to think, oh, they're not in there or something, but like they are. And kindness matters. And you can send a really warm thought like, hey, I see you, I know you, like, you know, whatever, like, I love your shoes. It doesn't matter what you say, but like you can say that in your mind. You can just say that to them, like make space for them. If you see a parent like struggling to get on an airplane and it's hard, like just give these families grace. They're working so hard, and that love will go a long way.
I love that. And it aligns well with what I've been trying to do, making kindness cool and compassion commonplace. And I just imagine myself one day seeing somebody and being like, bro, you been on the hill lately? And like a fist bump or something, and like seeing that little moment.
It's really sweet because those are some of the messages. I mean, that's almost like could be the season 2, honestly, some of the messages that are coming in. And some are just great because it's parents saying like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know this could happen. I did a test with my son the other day and I was writing things down and putting it on paper upstairs. And then I came downstairs and all these things were in my pocket. And then he picked up his letterboard and started typing what I wrote, and I unfolded them and it was true. And I mean, those are really lovely messages to get, that parents are discovering this slowly in their own children. And some parents have said, you know, I never thought my child could speak. I didn't ever think I could teach them to spell because they felt so far removed. And now I'm doing that. I mean, that alone, if just those two things are happening, it's like, oh, yes, yes. Like, get these kids on the letterboards, get everyone on a letterboard. But then beyond that,
I was just
sorry,
saying, it's got to feel so rewarding for you to get messages like that.
it's awesome. It feels great. It really does. But I think the other thing that has been really sweet is like someone the other day sent me a message that was just like, I saw, like, I was walking through whatever and I saw a non-speaker in Trader Joe's, I think they said. And he's like, I looked at them and with my eyes and I thought in my head, like, hey man, I know you're in there. Like, I'm listening, like something like I'm listening to the telepathy tape. Swear to God, this is what the guy told me. And he said that the speller like gave him a fist pump, just it just, and he's like, it could have been because I was just looking at him deeply and compassionately. And he's like, but it was right after I said that like the fist pump came. And I just thought that was so cool. I mean, I love that people are just like experimenting with it, because to go from a place in society where so often the non-speakers have been treated just like garbage, totally dismissed, overlooked, like looked past, to have a person stop and look you in the eye. Yeah. And as people, if they listen to the podcast, will find out the spellers prefer mind-to-mind communication. They don't like words. They don't want even parents talk to them. They'd rather have questions asked in their mind, in the mind. So to know the general public is engaging in that way is not the rallying cry I would have seen myself putting out there 5 years ago, 3 years ago, but it's the best thing ever,
Yeah. Yeah, the ripples are already happening. It's intriguing to, zoom out and dream big and imagine that the hero of some big budget action movie is a non-speaking, telepathy tapes inspired individual, or, TV shows, all the rest of it. So I'll put links in the show notes to all of your contact stuff. And I know you're raising money. There's a donate button on your website. I can link to that. And so the best way for people to get involved is to listen to the show and to support.
Yeah, and our mailing list even on the website, because we will have updates about the film. The film will get made. I mean, I am certain of that, and it will start to get made next year. And so, there'll be updates. And one of the things that my podcast producer, Jen, was talking about is she's like, maybe on the field, like when these things are happening in certain tests, we can like post updates and post them on Facebook and post them on Twitter. Like we have all those accounts. So it's under the Telepathy Tapes. So just stay engaged, because we're also going to do some live events coming up with families and with some of the scientists. I think we're going to do a morbid anatomy live event. So there'll be all sorts of stuff. I just haven't been able to pivot to that yet, but we will, and then it will be really awesome.
Yeah. Well, if you get up to,
sorry, go ahead, go.
If you get up to Vancouver, keep me posted. I'll spread the word and fill some seats and give you a hug and high five and all the rest.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, congrats on your baby.
Thanks. Yeah. I keep hearing that, and I keep saying, but when? But
6 months. 6 months. You're in the thick of it right now.
I feel like I'm clinging to a wet log in the middle of the ocean right now. Just like everything's different.
Everything's different.
Yeah.
And
but thank
they
you.
say the first year of your first child's life is harder than losing a job, moving, or getting divorced, or going through the death of a parent.
I mean, yeah.
Because your world changes so much.
I mean, we could do a whole other podcast on just that. And maybe we should one day. But yeah, it's a lot. It's just all the cliches are true. People ask me how I'm doing, and I just say yes, all the adjectives, all at once, all the time. I mean, maybe there's an analogy there to what you're working on, which is like, it's all happening right now, all at once, forever. And I've tapped into the cosmic library of experiences, feeling all the feels, and try to figure out who I am and how the world works perpetually. It just feels more intense at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I know.
Thank you for that.
It'll get easier.
Every day is a blessing. Truly.
Doesn't
it's
always
the best.
feel like that. I mean, having a baby is great. It is great, but it is hard. It is hard. And I think that there's all these things that parents are told, and it's not always true that like the first 6 months are just like every moment is like this like beautiful Disney movie. Like I really loved it once my kids started talking. Like to me, that was like awesome. And walking. Like some people love the baby stage. Love it, love it, love it. Just want to. And I mean, I loved, there's nothing like holding your baby and then falling asleep on your arms and all that stuff. Like, yes, it's so sweet, but like once we could like talk and wrestle and play and like, read
I'm excited.
together, that's fun. And you're there, you're getting there real
Yeah,
close.
she's smiling now, and just this last week, she's discovering her hands and can grab a
Yeah.
little bit. But I've said to my partner, like, once she starts giggling, like it is on. Like the dad jokes, like injected into my veins. Like I'm ready for some of that. But yeah, and it's so hard, as you know. Like there's just so much all the time. But life is good. Thank you for being here. Thanks for the
Thank
work you do. I am proud of you. I don't even really
thank
know
you.
you, but I'm proud of you as just as a creator and as a human and someone spreading some light in the world. It's wonderful. And if you're still listening to this, stop. Go download her podcast and listen to that one instead.
Thank
Ky Dickens, you're a gem. Thank you for being here.
you. All right. Take care, Jeremy. Talk to you soon.
Okay. So that was the conversation with Ky Dickens. As mentioned, there are links in the show notes. You can check out the series, the Telepathy Tapes. You can donate some cash if you'd like, and get it in your ear bones. Truly, it is a very fascinating bit of material that has the potential to devastate the way that you see the world, the way that you see yourself, and offers a lot of interesting and hopeful ideas for us to consider as we move forward as human beings trying to live this miraculous mystery together. But thank you for being here. Thanks for listening. And as always, you could find me everywhere online at Long Distance Love Bombs, on Instagram, got an email newsletter. I take people walking in Spain. I coach people. I do keynotes. Got the whole personal development starter package. I love you. I'm glad you're here. And I look forward to talking to you soon.